By the year 1916, something strange had happened to the world. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once. By that year, half of all the cars on Earth carried one name, not a country, not a government, not an empire, one man, Henry Ford. Half of the world's automobiles, built by a single company, designed under a single philosophy, moving at the speed one man believed was correct. This was not just success, this was dominance. And yet, just a few years later, that same man would nearly destroy the very empire he built, not because he failed, but because he refused to change. That contradiction is where this story begins, because Henry Ford did not simply put the world on wheels. He changed how humans worked, how they were paid, how fast they moved, how repetitive their lives became. And whether we realize it or not, we are still living inside the system he designed. Before Ford, cars were toys. They were fragile, loud, unreliable machines built by craftsmen, not factories. Each vehicle assembled slowly by hand, each one slightly different from the last. Cars were expensive, unpredictable, and mostly useless to ordinary people. If you owned an automobile in the early 1900s, it said something very specific about you. It said you were wealthy. It said you had time to waste. It said you were willing to gamble on a machine that might not even start. For most Americans, cars were entertainment, not transportation. And that was exactly the problem Henry Ford set out to destroy. Ford did not want to build a better car. He wanted to erase the idea that cars were special at all. He wanted them boring, predictable, identical. He wanted automobiles to become so common that no one would ever talk about them again. And in doing so, he didn't just change transportation, he changed the meaning of work. He changed the rhythm of daily life. He changed what society expected from human beings. Because once cars became cheap, fast, and reliable, everything else had to change to keep up. Cities expanded, distances collapsed, time itself felt faster. And behind it all was a factory system that demanded precision, repetition, and obedience. Henry Ford didn't just mass-produce vehicles. He mass-produced routine. By 1916, the Ford Motor Company was producing cars at a scale the world had never seen. Not hundreds, not thousands, hundreds of thousands, every single year. At a speed that made competitors look medieval. While other manufacturers built cars one at a time, Ford built movement itself. And the consequences were immediate. Workers no longer controlled their pace. Craftsmen no longer controlled the process. Individual skill no longer mattered. The system decided everything. Where you stood, what you touched, how long you worked. When you stopped, efficiency became the highest virtue. Speed became morality. And anyone who slowed the system down became a problem. To Ford, this was progress. To the nation, it looked like prosperity. But underneath the celebration, something uncomfortable was happening. For the first time in history, human beings were no longer shaping machines. Machines were shaping human beings. The assembly line did not care who you were. It did not care what you felt. It did not care if the job bored you, exhausted you, or hollowed you out. It only cared that you repeated the same motion, correctly, every few seconds, for hours. Day after day, year after year. And yet, Americans embraced it. Because the system worked, cars became cheaper, wages rose, jobs multiplied. People could suddenly afford the very machines they built. This was the genius of Ford. He understood that mass production only succeeds if mass consumption follows. and so he paid his workers enough to buy his cars. On the surface, it looked revolutionary, almost compassionate. But beneath it was something far more calculated. Because when your livelihood, your transportation, and your routine all come from the same system, leaving becomes almost impossible. Ford didn't just sell cars, he sold dependence, and the world bought it. By the mid-1910s, America was no longer a nation of farms and footpaths. It was becoming a nation of roads. Highways stretched outward from cities like veins. Suburbs appeared where fields once stood. Work was no longer something you lived next to. It was something you drove to every morning, every day, on a schedule that no longer belonged to nature, but to machines. This transformation happened so quickly that most people never stopped to question it. They didn't ask what was lost. They didn't ask who decided this was the future. They didn't ask what kind of person thrives in a system built entirely around speed and repetition. They just adapted. And Henry Ford watched it all unfold with satisfaction. Because from his perspective, the results spoke for themselves. Millions of cars on the road. Millions of jobs created. A nation in motion. But success has a strange side effect. It convinces you that you are always right. And Henry Ford believed that more deeply than almost anyone. He believed his system was not just efficient, but morally superior. He believed simplicity was virtue, uniformity was fairness, and choice was unnecessary. As long as people could afford the car, what did it matter what it looked like? As long as the system worked, what did it matter how people felt inside it? This certainty would eventually become his greatest weakness. Because the world he helped create did not stop evolving. Tastes changed. Expectations grew. Comfort, style, and individuality began to matter. And while the rest of the industry listened, adapted, and experimented, Henry Ford stood still. The very system that made him powerful began to outgrow him. But in 1916, none of that was visible yet. In 1916, Henry Ford looked unstoppable. Half the cars on Earth carried his name. His factories ran like machines inside machines. His methods were copied, studied, and feared. Governments watched him. Business leaders admired him. Workers depended on him, and quietly, without ceremony, the modern industrial world locked itself into the rhythm he created. A rhythm of speed, of repetition, of efficiency above all else. The question is not whether Henry Ford changed the world. He did. The real question is whether the world he built was ever meant for human beings. Because once you design a system that values output more than people, that system does not stop at factories. It spreads into offices, into warehouses, into algorithms, into every job measured by time, productivity, and performance. Long after Henry Ford was gone, his ideas kept moving. Just like his cars. And we are still riding inside them. Long before factories, before assembly lines, before automobiles filled the roads, there was a farm. A quiet farm outside what would later become Dearborn, Michigan. Flatland. Slow seasons. Endless repetition dictated by weather, daylight, and muscle. For most families in the 1800s, this was stability. For young Henry Ford, it felt like a prison. The farm demanded patience. It demanded physical strength. It demanded obedience to forces you could not control. And Henry Ford despised every part of it. He did the work because he was expected to. Because he was the oldest son. Because tradition said this was his future. But nothing about the farm made sense to him. The work was slow. The tools were crude. The results were uncertain. You could work all day and still lose everything to a storm. To Henry, that wasn't honest labor. That was chaos. What disturbed him most wasn't the effort, it was the inefficiency. On the farm, effort did not guarantee results. And Henry Ford needed the world to make sense. Even as a child, he was drawn to things that followed rules. Gears, springs, metal parts that moved only when you told them to. Machines didn't guess. They didn't hesitate. They didn't misunderstand instructions. They either worked or they didn't. And if they didn't, there was a reason. That clarity fascinated him. At school, Henry struggled. Not because he wasn't intelligent, but because he wasn't interested. Classrooms moved too slowly. Lessons felt disconnected from reality. He left formal education early, never making it past the 8th grade. For most people at the time, that would have been a limitation. For Henry Ford, it was a relief. He preferred learning alone. Learning by taking things apart. Learning by failure. Learning without waiting for permission. When his father gave him a pocket watch as a boy, it changed everything. Henry didn't wear it. He opened it. He studied the gears, the balance wheel, the precise way every component depended on the others. Within days, he could disassemble and reassemble the watch from memory. Soon, neighbors were bringing him their broken timepieces. Henry didn't just fix them, he improved them. Word spread quickly. The boy who hated the farm had become the boy who understood machines. And in a small rural community that made him different, machines offered something the farm never did: control. You could predict a machine's behavior. You could standardize it. You could demand consistency. Human beings, on the other hand, were unpredictable. They were emotional. They were inconsistent. They made mistakes for reasons that couldn't always be explained. From a young age, Henry Ford noticed this difference. And he remembered it. When Henry was 12, he saw a steam engine for the first time. Not in a book, not in a drawing. In motion, it was loud, violent, powerful, and yet disciplined. It obeyed pressure, heat, physics. Watching it work left a permanent mark. From that moment on, machines were no longer a curiosity. They were an obsession. By the age of 15, Henry had built his own steam engine, not because anyone asked him to, not because it was practical, but because he needed to understand how power could be controlled, how energy could be directed, how motion could be tamed. While other boys his age were preparing to inherit land, Henry Ford was preparing to escape it. Then something happened that would harden his thinking forever. Henry's mother died suddenly. Her death shattered what little emotional attachment he had to the farm. She had been the only reason the place felt human. The only presence that softened the monotony. With her gone, the farm became unbearable. It wasn't just slow anymore, it was painful. Every field reminded him of a life he did not want. Every chore felt like a sentence being carried out. Henry Ford didn't just dislike the farm. He associated it with loss. And he began to see machines as the opposite of that pain. Machines didn't die. They didn't leave. They didn't create emotional voids. They simply stopped working and could be repaired. That distinction mattered more than he ever admitted. After his mother's death, Henry's desire to leave intensified. At 16, against his father's wishes, he packed his belongings and left. No inheritance, no safety net. Just a clear intention. He was done with slow systems. He was done with nature's unpredictability. He was done waiting. Detroit was changing at the time. Steam power had turned it into a city hungry for young mechanics, Factories were replacing fields. Noise replaced silence. For Henry Ford, it felt like arriving in the future. He took whatever work he could find. Streetcar companies, machine shops. Some jobs lasted days, others weeks. He was fired more than once, not because he was incompetent, but because he questioned methods. He wanted to know why things were done a certain way. And employers didn't always appreciate that. At night, when money was tight, Henry returned to what he knew best: repairing watches, 6 hours a night. 6 days a week, not glamorous, but precise. While others slept, Henry worked with gears and springs, training his mind to see systems, patterns, processes. Even when exhausted, he kept experimenting, because learning machines was never work to him. It was order. When he returned briefly to the farm at 19, nothing had changed, and that only confirmed his instincts. He avoided field work whenever possible. Instead, he focused on a portable steam engine his father had purchased. He mastered it quickly. So quickly that neighbors paid him to operate their engines. For the first time, his mechanical skill had value. Real value. That reputation spread. And eventually, it reached the attention of a major manufacturer. The Westinghouse Engine Company hired him. His job was simple: travel, install engines, repair failures. But what mattered more was what Henry observed. He saw how machines standardized labor. He saw how one engine could replace dozens of workers. He saw how power, once centralized, changed everything around it. Around this time, Henry began reading obsessively: technical manuals, engineering journals. And one day, he discovered something that would change the direction of his life: the internal combustion engine. Unlike steam engines, these machines didn't need time to warm up. They didn't require massive boilers. They were compact, efficient, and potentially everywhere. Most Americans had never heard of them. But Henry understood immediately what they represented: freedom from steam, freedom from railways, freedom from fixed routes. He didn't just want to use these engines. He wanted to master them, to understand every spark, every explosion inside the cylinder. So he applied for work at an electric power company, not because electricity was his passion, but because electricity explained ignition. As a night engineer, he was responsible for maintaining massive generators. When they worked, he waited, and when he waited, he studied electricity, timing, systems that ran invisibly but controlled entire cities. This environment suited him. Machines did not argue. They did not negotiate. They performed exactly as designed. And if they failed, it was never personal. Henry trusted that. By the time his son was born, Henry Ford had built his first working gasoline engine. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't safe. But it worked. And that was enough. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to prove something to himself. That complex systems could be simplified. That power could be controlled. That motion could be standardized. The idea of a horseless carriage wasn't revolutionary to him. It was logical. Animals were unpredictable. Machines were not. This way of thinking would follow Henry Ford for the rest of his life. He believed systems mattered more than individuals. Processes mattered more than feelings. Efficiency mattered more than tradition. And once he found a system that worked, he trusted it completely, sometimes blindly. This is where the foundation was laid. Not just for the automobile, but for the mindset that would define modern industrial society. A belief that order could replace chaos. That repetition could replace skill. that machines could succeed where humans failed. Henry Ford did not grow up wanting to control people, but he grew up believing people needed control. Because without it, things fell apart. Machines didn't need motivation. They needed design. And from the moment he left the farm, Henry Ford was designing something much larger than a car. He was designing a world where everything moved according to plan, even if humans had to adapt to fit inside it. Detroit was supposed to be the beginning. A city powered by steam. A city built on engines, rails, and electricity. A city where machines mattered more than tradition. For Henry Ford, it felt like the right place. But the city did not welcome him the way he expected. He learned quickly that being obsessed with machines was not the same as being useful to employers. Ford found work easily. Keeping it was another story. At one streetcar manufacturing company, he was fired after just 6 days. Not because he couldn't do the job, but because he questioned how things were done. He asked why parts were shaped a certain way, why processes were slow, why inefficiency was tolerated. To Ford, these questions were logical. To managers, they were disruptive. So he moved on. Machine shops, workshops, factories that needed young hands and sharp minds. Some jobs lasted weeks. Some barely survived probation. Each dismissal reinforced a lesson Ford was quietly absorbing. People protected systems they didn't understand, and those systems were often inefficient. So Ford stopped trying to fit in. He stopped expecting approval. Instead, he divided his life in two. Days were for earning money. Nights were for obsession. During the day, he worked as an engineer, maintaining machines that powered the city. At night, after everyone else went home, Ford stayed awake, experimenting, reading, building. His apartment slowly filled with tools, parts, and half-finished ideas. Gasoline engines fascinated him. Unlike steam, they were compact, immediate, responsive. They didn't wait. Ford believed this was the future. And he believed no one in America was taking them seriously enough. In 1896, after years of trial and error, Ford finished his first experimental vehicle. He called it the quadricycle. It was crude. 4 bicycle wheels, a small gasoline engine, no reverse gear, no real brakes. It overheated easily. It vibrated violently. And it barely fit through the door of his workshop, but it moved. And to Ford, movement meant success. Technically, it was a triumph. Practically, it was useless. The quadricycle couldn't handle rough roads. It couldn't carry passengers safely. It wasn't reliable enough for everyday use. Ford sold it anyway. Not because it was ready, but because he needed capital. And more importantly, he needed validation. That sale gave him confidence. And confidence pushed him into his first real business venture. In 1899, with the backing of investors, Ford founded the Detroit Automobile Company. On paper, it looked promising. Capital, facilities, skilled workers. But almost immediately, problems emerged. Ford wanted to keep improving the design. The investors wanted products to sell. Ford believed perfection came before profit. The investors believed speed mattered more. Neither side was willing to compromise. Production moved slowly. Parts arrived late. Each car took months to complete. Only a handful were ever built. From the investors' perspective, the company was bleeding money. From Ford's perspective, the company was rushing failure. Eventually, the investors made a decision. They removed Henry Ford. The company collapsed shortly after. For most people, this would have been a warning. A moment for reflection, a chance to reconsider priorities. For Henry Ford, it was something else entirely. Relief. He was free again. Free from interference, free from compromise, free to focus entirely on machines. Ford didn't believe the company failed because of his ideas. He believed it failed because other people didn't understand them. This distinction mattered. Because it meant Ford didn't change, he doubled down. If investors wouldn't trust him, he would force them to, and he knew exactly how. Racing. At the turn of the century, automobile racing was wildly popular in America. It was dangerous, unregulated, spectacular. Manufacturers used races to prove speed, reliability, and engineering superiority. Ford saw something else. A public demonstration of control. He wasn't interested in trophies. He wanted proof. If his machines could dominate on the track, investors would have no choice but to listen. So Ford began building racing cars. Not comfortable cars, not practical cars. Pure machines designed for one purpose: to win. In 1901, one of Ford's race cars defeated a vehicle built by Alexander Winton, a well-known automaker. The victory shocked the industry. Ford was no longer an unknown engineer. He was a man who built machines that could outperform anyone else's, and suddenly, investors returned. This led to Ford's second company, the Henry Ford Company. On the surface, it looked like a fresh start. But the same pattern emerged. Ford focused on engineering. The investors focused on sales. When Ford continued developing racing cars instead of passenger vehicles, tensions exploded. The investors brought in another engineer to take control, a man named Henry Leland. Ford saw this as betrayal. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He walked away. Once again, his company moved on without him. And once again, Ford refused to see this as failure. The company would later be renamed Cadillac, and it would succeed. That fact didn't bother Ford. What bothered him was the loss of control. To Henry Ford, losing control was worse than losing money. Because control meant certainty, and certainty was everything. After leaving his second company, Ford partnered with a former cyclist named Tom Cooper. Together, they built a new racing machine, the Ford 999. It was monstrous, 80 horsepower, barely steerable, terrifyingly fast. When driven by Barney Oldfield, a former bicycle racer, the car shattered records. It defeated competitors again and again. Crowds gathered. Newspapers wrote headlines. And Henry Ford became known as the man who built the fastest machines in America. This reputation did exactly what he intended. Investors lined up. They didn't question his methods. They didn't challenge his obsession. They wanted to be associated with success, with dominance, with speed. In 1903, Ford finally founded his third company. This time, he was careful. He retained control. He limited interference. And he made one thing clear: this company would be built his way. The Ford Motor Company was born not out of humility, but out of defiance. Ford had failed twice. But he had learned nothing about compromise. Instead, he learned how to eliminate it. From this point on, every failure reinforced the same belief. People were the problem. Machines were the solution. People argued. Machines obeyed. People hesitated. Machines repeated. People failed emotionally. Machines failed logically. And logical failure could be fixed. Ford didn't want partners. He wanted systems. Systems that ran without debate, without personality, without resistance. This mindset would allow him to change the world. And it would also make him incredibly dangerous. Because when you stop seeing people as collaborators and start seeing them as variables, control becomes the ultimate goal, not progress, not happiness, control. Henry Ford was no longer just trying to build cars. He was building a philosophy. One where efficiency mattered more than empathy. One where obedience mattered more than creativity. One where success justified everything. And by the end of this phase of his life, Ford had proven one thing beyond doubt. He would fail as many times as necessary. But he would never adjust himself. Instead, he would adjust the world. The idea did not come from a university. It did not come from a laboratory, and it certainly did not come from a boardroom. It came from a slaughterhouse in Chicago. At the turn of the 20th century, the Chicago meatpacking plants were among the most efficient industrial systems in the world. Animals entered at one end, meat exited at the other. No animal moved on its own. The carcass was pulled forward on hooks. The workers did not chase the work came to them. Each man performed one motion, one cut, one slice, one task. Over and over again, the speed was relentless, but the system worked. When Henry Ford saw this, something clicked. Not because it was brutal, but because it was controlled. In Ford's mind, the slaughterhouse solved a problem he'd been wrestling with for years. How do you remove human variability from production? How do you eliminate hesitation, creativity, and individuality? How do you make output predictable? The answer was simple. You stop letting humans move freely, and you make the product move instead. Up until this point, automobiles were built the way furniture was built. One car, one team, start to finish. Each worker responsible for many tasks: skilled labor, slow labor, expensive labor. Ford believed this was wasteful, not morally, but mechanically. Too many decisions, too many hands, too much freedom. So he flipped the logic. Instead of building one car at a time, he broke the car into hundreds of small steps. Instead of craftsmen, he hired operators. Instead of skill, he required obedience. At the Highland Park factory, Ford began experimenting. Not cautiously, aggressively. He tore the production process apart. He rearranged tools. He timed movements with a stopwatch. He measured how long it took a worker to turn, to bend, to reach. Every unnecessary motion was eliminated. Every pause was shortened. Every inefficiency was treated as an enemy. Then came the conveyor, slow at first, almost awkward. But once it worked, everything changed. The car no longer waited for workers. Workers waited for the car. The assembly line dictated the rhythm, not the man, not the foreman, not even Ford himself. The system decided, and the numbers were staggering. What once took 12 hours to build now took 90 minutes. 90 minutes, production exploded, costs collapsed. The price of the Model T dropped again, and again, and again. Ford didn't just make cars cheaper, he made them unavoidable. Within a few years, the Model T was everywhere. Cities, small towns, dirt roads, farmland. America was no longer designed for walking or horses. It was redesigned for automobiles. And the automobile was designed for the assembly line. This was the moment the modern industrial world truly began. But while the nation celebrated affordability and access, something else was happening inside the factory walls. Workers were breaking. The jobs were simple, too simple, one motion, every few seconds, all day. No variation, no creativity, no sense of completion. Men who once built entire products now tightened the same bolt thousands of times a day. They didn't see the finished car. They didn't feel pride. They felt fatigue, boredom, alienation. Turnover skyrocketed. Workers quit in massive numbers. Some lasted days, others hours. Ford was confused. From his perspective, the job was easier than ever. Less skill required, less physical strain, higher output. But Ford had misunderstood something fundamental. Humans are not machines. And the mind reacts to monotony differently than steel does. The assembly line stripped work of meaning, and meaning mattered. So Ford responded the way he always did. He optimized. In 1914, he doubled wages. $5 a day, an unheard of sum. The press called it generosity. Competitors called it insanity. But Ford wasn't being charitable. He was solving a problem. Higher wages reduced turnover. Higher wages created loyalty. Higher wages allowed workers to buy the cars they built. It was brilliant, and it worked. The factory stabilized. The production line ran faster than ever. The Model T flooded the market. By the mid-1910s, Ford was producing more cars than all other manufacturers combined. America had become a nation on wheels. But the price of that efficiency was quietly accumulating. The assembly line did not just change work, it changed people. Workers adapted their bodies to the machine. Their minds followed. Life became segmented. Work hours, commute hours, sleep hours, everything timed. Everything measured. Efficiency escaped the factory and entered daily life. If the assembly line could optimize production, why not optimize offices? Why not optimize warehouses? Why not optimize time itself? The logic spread. And once it spread, it could not be contained. Ford believed he was creating freedom. Freedom from expensive transportation. Freedom from rural isolation. Freedom from scarcity. But the freedom came with rules. Rigid ones. To work at Ford, you had to conform, not just at work. In life, Ford investigators monitored employees' personal habits, how they spent money, how they lived, who they lived with. The same obsession with control that shaped the factory now shaped the workforce. From Ford's perspective, this was responsibility. From the worker's perspective, it was intrusion. But the system didn't care how it was perceived. It only cared that it functioned, and function it did. By 1916, half of all the cars on Earth were Fords. The assembly line became the blueprint for modern production. Factories across the world copied it. Governments admired it. Economists praised it. The idea that humans should adapt to machines, not the other way around, became normal. And Ford watched all of this with satisfaction. Because in his mind, the proof was undeniable. The system worked. Output increased. Costs dropped. Wages rose. What more evidence could anyone need? But what Ford never truly understood was that efficiency is never neutral. It shapes behavior. It rewards certain traits. It punishes others. The assembly line rewarded obedience. It punished curiosity. It rewarded endurance. It punished imagination. Over time, that doesn't just affect factories. It affects culture, education, expectations. The modern worker was born here, not as an individual, but as a role, a function, a replaceable part in a larger system. Henry Ford did not invent this idea, but he perfected it. And once perfected, it could not be undone. Even today, a century later, the logic remains. Metrics, KPIs, performance tracking, automation, all descendants of the same belief. That human effort must be optimized, measured, controlled. Efficiency came at a human cost, and the bill is still being paid. Henry Ford had achieved what no one else ever had. He built a machine that built machines. And in doing so, he quietly turned people into components. This was his greatest achievement, and his most dangerous legacy. In January of 1914, Henry Ford made an announcement that stunned the nation. He doubled the daily wage, $5 a day. At a time when the average factory worker earned less than half that amount, Ford's decision sounded revolutionary. Newspapers celebrated it. Politicians praised it. Business leaders were outraged. Some called it reckless. Others called it socialism. But workers across America heard something else: opportunity. Within days, Detroit was flooded. Men arrived by train, by foot, by horse-drawn carriage. They came from farms, factories, and cities that could not compete with Ford's pay. Some slept in parks. Some waited in lines stretching for blocks. Everyone wanted in. To the public, it looked like generosity. To Ford, it was strategy. The assembly line had a problem: turnover. Men quit constantly. The work was monotonous, soul-draining, repetitive beyond anything most had ever experienced. Doubling wages solved that. Higher pay kept workers in place, stabilized production, reduced training costs, and created something else entirely: loyalty. For the first time in industrial history, a factory job offered not just survival, but security. And security changes behavior. Workers didn't just show up. They stayed. They protected their positions. They followed rules. Ford understood something few industrialists did at the time. If you want control over a system, you must control the incentives. But the $5 day came with conditions. Unspoken at first, then explicit. To earn the full wage, workers had to live properly, and Ford defined what proper meant. The company created a sociological department. Its job was not to improve production. Its job was to investigate workers' lives. Inspectors visited homes. They checked cleanliness. They examined finances. They evaluated marriages. They asked how workers spent their money, whether they drank, whether they gambled, whether they saved. This was not advice. It was surveillance. If a worker failed to meet Ford's standards, the wage was cut, or the job was lost entirely. Ford believed he was improving lives. He believed poverty was the result of bad habits. He believed discipline could be taught. And he believed the factory was the right place to teach it. To him, this was not control. It was responsibility. But responsibility imposed from above looks different when you're living under it. Workers found themselves monitored not just at work, but at home. The same system that measured productivity on the factory floor now measured morality in private life. Ford didn't see a boundary. In his mind, efficiency and virtue were connected. A disciplined worker was a better worker. A sober worker was a reliable worker. A predictable life produced predictable output. The line between employment and ownership blurred. Ford paid his workers more than anyone else, but he also claimed more from them than anyone else: time, behavior, conformity, and in return, he offered stability. For many workers, it was a fair trade. For others, it felt suffocating, but few dared to complain. Because $5 a day was life-changing. It meant a better home, better food, education for children, and perhaps most importantly, a car. Ford workers could now afford the very product they built. This was not accidental, it was design. Mass production required mass consumption, and Ford ensured both sides fed each other. Work produced wages, wages produced buyers. Buyers sustained the factory. The loop closed perfectly. Critics argued that Ford had created a new kind of dependence, that workers were no longer just employed by the system, they were trapped inside it. Your job paid your wage bought your car took you to your job. Leaving meant losing everything. Ford dismissed these criticisms. He pointed to numbers: higher wages, lower turnover, increased production. He believed results justified methods. And for a time, it was impossible to argue with him. The American standard of living rose. Industrial productivity exploded. Other companies were forced to follow. Wages increased across industries. Working hours shortened. Ford had reshaped labor itself. But there was a darker side that numbers couldn't capture: the psychological cost. Workers learned to self-police, to adjust their behavior, not because they believed in Ford's values, but because deviation was risky. Individuality became a liability. Difference became dangerous. Conformity was rewarded, and this mindset extended beyond the factory gates. Communities near Ford plants began to resemble the system itself: orderly, predictable, quiet, efficient, but also rigid, unforgiving. Ford believed chaos was the enemy, and he was willing to enforce order at any cost. He once said he didn't believe in charity, he believed in wages. But what he offered wasn't just money, it was a blueprint for how to live. A belief that prosperity must be earned through obedience, that freedom must be structured, that people, left alone, would make poor choices, so choices had to be limited. The irony was subtle. Ford claimed to empower the common man, but he did so by narrowing the range of acceptable behavior. You could live better, as long as you lived correctly. The $5 day transformed American industry, but it also normalized a new relationship between employer and employee. One where the company did not just buy labor, it shaped identity. This was a new kind of power. Soft, invisible, justified by progress. And because it raised living standards, it was rarely questioned. Even today, echoes of this model remain. Performance bonuses tied to behavior. Corporate cultures that reward fit. Workplaces that blur the line between professional and personal life. Ford didn't invent these ideas, but he proved they worked. And once proven, they spread. The question remains unresolved. Was Henry Ford paying workers or buying obedience? Was the $5 day a gift? Or was it the price of control? The answer depends on where you stand. To the nation, Ford looked like a pioneer of fairness. To the system, he was an architect of compliance. And to the workers who lived inside it, the difference was often impossible to tell, because when survival improves, resistance fades. And when comfort grows, control becomes easier to accept. Henry Ford understood that better than anyone. He didn't rule through fear, he ruled through incentives. And that made his power far more durable. But every system built on control eventually faces a limit, a moment when change is required. And in the next phase of Henry Ford's life, that moment would arrive. Not from workers, not from critics, but from the market itself. And Ford would respond the only way he knew how: by refusing to change. By the early 1920s, Henry Ford had achieved something few humans ever do. He had won, not a market, not a race, but an era. The Model T dominated America. Roads were built for it. Cities adjusted to it. Families planned their lives around it. For years, Ford had been right about everything. And that success shaped his greatest weakness. Because when a system rewards you for being right long enough, you stop listening. The Model T was simple, durable, affordable, and utterly outdated. But Henry Ford didn't see it that way. To him, the Model T wasn't just a car, it was proof. Proof that simplicity defeated excess. Proof that uniformity beat choice. Proof that his philosophy worked. When critics argued the car was uncomfortable, he ignored them. When competitors added features, colors, and styling, he mocked them. When customers asked for something new, he dismissed them. Henry Ford famously insisted customers could have the car in any color they wanted, as long as it was black. What sounded like confidence was actually rigidity. And the market was changing. Americans were no longer just buying transportation. They were buying identity, comfort, status, choice. Competitors understood this. Ford did not. While Ford refused to adapt, others moved fast. General Motors didn't build one car. They built many, different brands, different price points, different styles. They gave customers something Ford refused to offer: options. General Motors introduced annual model changes. They made cars feel new even when the mechanics were familiar. They turned the automobile into a fashion statement. At the same time, Chrysler Corporation focused on engineering innovation. Hydraulic brakes, more powerful engines, better ride quality. While Ford looked backward, the industry moved forward. And Henry Ford watched it happen with disbelief. From his perspective, nothing was broken. Sales were still strong. Factories were still running. The system still worked. What he couldn't accept was that the world no longer wanted what he wanted. Inside the company, voices began to rise. Executives warned him. Engineers pushed for redesigns. And his own son, Edsel Ford, pleaded for change. Edsel was different. He understood customers. He understood design. He understood that success required evolution. But Henry Ford didn't see his son. He saw opposition. He dismissed Edsel's concerns, overruled decisions, delayed progress. The company stagnated. By the late 1920s, sales declined sharply. Ford was forced to confront reality. In 1927, after nearly 2 decades, the Model T was discontinued. The factory shut down temporarily. Workers were sent home. Production stopped. The pause was devastating. Competitors surged ahead. Ford scrambled to catch up. The new Model A was rushed into production. It was modern, stylish, competitive. But the damage was done. Ford had lost momentum. The system that once crushed competitors now struggled to respond. Because it had been built for repetition, not adaptation. Henry Ford had optimized the company for a world that no longer existed. And the man who had once reshaped time itself could not turn it back. The tragedy wasn't that Ford failed. It was that he succeeded too completely. His certainty hardened into blindness. The same system that made him powerful made him deaf. He could not hear the market. He could not hear his own company. He could not hear his own son. By the time Henry Ford loosened his grip, the era had passed. Ford Motor Company survived, but it was no longer untouchable. The cost of refusing to change had finally been paid. Henry Ford died in 1947, but his system did not die with him. It multiplied. The assembly line escaped the factory. It entered offices, warehouses, call centers, algorithms. Today, work still moves to us, just faster, more quietly, and more efficiently than ever. In massive fulfillment centers run by companies like Amazon, workers follow scanners instead of foremen. The line is digital now. Tasks arrive on screens. Metrics track every movement. Speed determines value. In factories operated by companies like Tesla, automation works alongside humans. Robots don't sleep. They don't complain. They don't question instructions. Efficiency remains the ultimate goal. Across global supply chains, from electronics to apparel, companies like Foxconn operate at a scale Henry Ford would have admired. Standardization, repetition, output measured in seconds. And now, artificial intelligence enters the picture. Algorithms assign tasks, predict performance, optimize labor. The logic is the same. Only the tools have changed. KPIs replace stopwatches. Dashboards replace foremen. But the question remains, how much efficiency is enough? At what point does optimization stop serving people and start shaping them? Henry Ford believed systems could fix human weakness, and for a time he was right. But systems don't understand meaning. They don't understand fulfillment. They don't understand when to stop. They only know how to improve output. Faster, cheaper, more. We still live inside the rhythm Ford created. We measure productivity. We optimize routines. We sacrifice depth for speed. And we rarely ask who benefits most. Henry Ford didn't just build cars. He built the modern world, and once we stepped inside it, we never clocked out.